The Stone Creek Pack Lodge blazed with firelight on the night that would shatter Alara's world forever. She stood in the shadows near the back wall, pressing herself against the rough timber, as if she could dissolve into the wood itself. The great hall thundered with celebration. Wolves from every corner of the territory had gathered for the annual mate-marking ceremony, the sacred night when the moon goddess would reveal the fated bonds between unmated wolves who had come of age. Alara was 20 years old, small for a wolf, unremarkable in every way that mattered to her pack. Her hair fell past her shoulders in pale, wheat-colored waves, and her eyes held the gray of winter storms. But it was her scent that marked her true place in the hierarchy of Stone Creek. Chamomile and rain, the soft, forgettable fragrance of an omega. In the old legends, omegas were cherished. They were the peacemakers, the healers, the gentle hearts that held packs together through dark times. But Stone Creek had forgotten those stories generations ago. Here in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, omegas were the bottom, the servants, the scapegoats, the wolves that other wolves stepped on when they needed to feel tall. Alara had spent her entire life with her head bowed. She mended torn tunics with careful stitches. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached. She ensured the Alpha's table was always full, always perfect, always ready. And through it all, she kept her sense suppressed, her presence small, her hopes locked away in the quietest chamber of her heart. But tonight those hopes refused to stay hidden. Tonight was different. Alpha Garrett Hale would seek his fated mate. The moon goddess would speak through the sacred bond connecting two souls across the crowded hall. And Alara, foolish Alara, had allowed herself to dream that the goddess might see her, might choose her, might finally lift her from the shadows and give her a place where she belonged. She watched Garrett from across the room, her pulse quickening despite her best efforts to stay calm. He was magnificent. There was no denying it. At 25, Garrett Hale had held the title of Alpha for 3 years, and he wore power like other men wore fine clothes. He stood taller than any wolf in the hall, with dark hair that caught the firelight and a jowl that could have been carved from the mountain stone itself. His eyes were the deep amber of aged whiskey, and when he smiled, it was the smile of a predator who knew exactly how dangerous he was. The other wolves parted before him like water around a boulder. The females watched him with naked hunger. The males kept their gazes low, their necks exposed in subtle submission. Even the elders' gray-muzzled wolves who remembered his father and grandfather deferred to the raw authority that rolled off him in waves. But Alara saw something else when she looked at Garrett Hale. She saw the boy he had been. 12 years ago, before his father's death, before the weight of the Alpha title crushed all softness from his soul, Garrett had been different. Alara remembered a summer afternoon by the creek that gave their pack its name. She had been 8 years old, crying over a scraped knee, and a boy with messy dark hair had appeared from the trees. He had not mocked her. He had not walked away. Instead, young Garrett had knelt beside her and pressed a handful of wild berries into her palm. His eyes had been kind then. His smile had been real. She had bandaged his scrapes a dozen times after that summer. Secret meetings by the water where no one could see the Alpha's son sharing stolen moments with an Omega girl. He would appear with torn knuckles from fighting or gashed arms from climbing, and she would clean his wounds with careful hands while he told her stories about the mountains he wanted to explore. Those memories were all she had now. A tiny ember of warmth that she had guarded through years of cruelty, years of servitude, years of being invisible. Surely the moon goddess had seen that connection. Surely the bond between them, fragile as it was, meant something. The hall fell silent as Elder Harmon raised his weathered hands. He was ancient, the oldest wolf in Stone Creek, with a voice that carried the weight of centuries. His milky eyes swept across the assembled pack, and when he spoke, even the fire seemed to quiet itself to listen. Alpha Garrett Hale. The elder's words were rolled through the hall like distant thunder. You have come of age to receive the blessing of the moon goddess. Tonight she will reveal your fated mate, your lunar, your other half. Step forward and seek what destiny has written in the stars. Garrett strode to the center of the lodge. The firelight carved deep shadows across his face, turning his features into something almost demonic. His scent preceded him, sharp musk and oak, a fragrance so potent that every wolf in the room felt the urge to bow their heads. He was not just an alpha. He was the alpha of this territory, the apex predator in a world of predators. Alara's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. Garrett closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. The room held its collective breath. He turned slowly, scenting the air, following an invisible thread that only he could perceive. He walked past the blacksmith's daughter, a strong-featured woman with arms like oak branches who trembled with barely contained excitement. He walked past the pack's finest huntress, a she-wolf with copper hair and hungry eyes who watched him like he was prey she intended to claim. He walked past daughters of wealthy families, past proven warriors, past every female wolf who had positioned herself to catch his attention. He stopped directly in front of Alara. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Alara's heart stopped beating, literally stopped. For 3 eternal seconds, she stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to do anything except stare up at the amber eyes that had found her in the shadows. He was looking at her, the Omega. And then she felt it, the bond. It sparked to life in the center of her chest, a silver thread so beautiful it made her want to weep. She could feel it stretching between them, connecting her heart to his, weaving their souls together in a pattern older than time itself. The moon goddess had seen. The goddess had chosen. Alpha. Alara whispered the word like a prayer, her hands trembling at her sides. Garrett stared at her, his expression unreadable. The firelight danced across his face, casting strange shapes that she could not interpret. His eyes moved over her, taking in her worn tunic, her bare feet, the chamomile scent that marked her as the lowest of the low. Then slowly a smile spread across his face. But it was not the smile she remembered from their childhood. This smile held no warmth, no kindness, no recognition of the girl who had bandaged his wounds and kept his secrets. This smile was all teeth. Alara. His voice carried easily through the silent hall, amplified by some cruelty of acoustics. Alara, the Omega. Alpha. She said again, but her voice cracked on the word. Something was wrong. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. Garrett tilted his head, studying her, the way a man might study a piece of broken pottery before discarding it. The moon goddess, he announced to the room, his voice dripping with theatrical contempt, has a strange sense of humor. Nervous laughter rippled through the assembled wolves, then bolder laughter, then outright mockery. Alara's face burned. She could feel the heat crawling up her neck, spreading across her cheeks, consuming her. She offers me an Omega. Garrett continued playing to the crowd, now feeding on their cruelty like a wolf feeding on carrion. A weak link, a servant, a creature so pathetic that even her own scent apologizes for existing. The silver thread in Alara's chest began to pulse with pain. She offers me this. Garrett gestured at Alara with one dismissive hand. This creature, to be my lunar, to stand beside me, to bear my heirs, to represent the strength of Stone Creek to our allies and our enemies. He laughed. The sound was sharp and cold like ice cracking under sudden weight. I would sooner mate with a mountain goat. The hall exploded with laughter. Wolves who had never spoken to Alara, wolves who had stepped over her in hallways, wolves who had eaten the food she prepared without ever meeting her eyes, all of them howled with mirth at her humiliation. But Garrett was not finished. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell him, close enough that the bond screamed at her to reach out and touch him. His amber eyes bore into her winter gray ones, and she saw something there that she had never seen before. Hatred. Pure, undiluted hatred. You thought the goddess would elevate you. He spoke softly now for her ears alone, though the silent hall carried every word to every corner. You thought this bond would save you. You thought you could rise above your station. Garrett, she breathed his name not as a title but as a plea. Please, we were friends once, you remember? By the creek, you have to remember. Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of recognition, a ghost of the boy he had been. Then it vanished, crushed beneath the weight of his cruelty. I remember nothing, his voice hardened to steel. I see nothing. You are nothing. He turned to face the crowd, his arms spread wide in theatrical proclamation. I, Garrett Hale Alpha of the Stone Creek Pack, reject this bond. I reject you, Alara. You will never be my lunar. You will never stand at my side. You will never bear my name or my children. I cast you out from the blessing of the moon goddess. He paused, letting the words sink into her like poison. You are worthless. You are beneath consideration. You do not exist. The silver thread in Alara's chest did not break. It tore. It ripped itself apart with jagged edges that shredded everything inside her. The pain was beyond anything she had ever experienced. It was not just emotional, it was physical, real. A wound that would never fully heal, carved into the very essence of her being. She gasped, choking on agony, her knees buckling beneath her. The hall erupted in celebration. The rejection was complete. The Alpha had spoken, and the pack, sensing their leader's disdain, turned on her like wolves scenting wounded prey. They laughed. They pointed. They called out insults that blurred together into a wall of sound. Someone threw a gnawed rib bone. It struck her shoulder and splattered grease across her worn tunic. Garrett turned his back on her. The symbolic dismissal sealed her fate. He reached out and grabbed the arm of the blacksmith's daughter, the one he had passed earlier, and pulled her into a rough, claiming kiss. The pack roared its approval. Their Alpha had chosen. Not the Omega, never the Omega. Alara scrambled backward, blinded by tears. Her chest burned where the bond had been torn away. Her mind reeled with the enormity of what had just happened. She had been rejected. Publicly. Completely. Irreversibly. No one watched her flee. No one cared. She was less than worthless now. She was a rejected Omega, the lowest form of life in the hierarchy of wolves. She slipped out the back door of the lodge and into the freezing mountain night. The laughter followed her. It rang in her ears, sharper than the claws of any rival, more painful than any wound she had ever suffered. It burrowed into her brain and nested there, a memory that would never fade no matter how many years passed. She ran, her bare feet cut against stones and roots as she fled through the darkness. The small drafty shed she shared with Thomas, an elderly Omega who had shown her what little kindness existed in this pack, loomed ahead. She burst through the door and stood gasping in the tiny space. She had nothing. A spare tunic, threadbare and patched. A small hunting knife her father had left her before he died, the blade worn thin from years of use. A half-eaten loaf of bread she had hidden beneath her cot, saved from the scraps the pack allowed her. She stuffed them into a worn sack with shaking hands. She could not stay. To remain in Stone Creek was death. A rejected mate, especially a rejected Omega, had no protection. No status, no hope. The pack would destroy her either through deliberate cruelty or simple neglect. She would starve in weeks, or she would be found in the woods with her throat torn out and no one would bother to investigate. Her wolf whimpered inside her. The small, timid creature that had always been her companion was curled in a tight ball, dying from the bond shatter. It could barely lift its head, barely acknowledge her existence. Get up. Alara forced the thought through the pain. Get up or die here. She looked north. The Blackwood Mountains rose against the night sky like the teeth of some enormous beast. Jagged peaks blocked the stars. Ancient pines clustered at their base, their branches heavy with snow. Even from miles away, she could feel the danger radiating from those slopes. The Blackwood Range was forbidden territory. Everyone in Stone Creek knew the stories. Rogue wolves haunted those peaks, feral creatures driven mad by isolation and hunger. Mountain lions prowled the cliffs, silent killers that could take down a wolf without warning. The weather could turn deadly in minutes, sunny skies becoming blizzards that buried everything in white death. Wolves who entered the Blackwoods did not return. It was a place wolves went to die. Alara took one last look at the lodge. Firelight glowed through the windows, warm and golden. Music and laughter spilled into the night, the sounds of celebration. Somewhere inside, Garrett Hale was basking in the approval of wolves who saw cruelty as strength, who measured worth by dominance rather than character. That warmth would never be hers. She turned her back on Stone Creek Pack and ran toward the mountains' ends. She ran toward her death, or her freedom. At that moment, she could not tell the difference. The Blackwood Mountains were not a sanctuary. They were a prison of stone and ice, and they wanted her dead. The first week was a blur of agonizing survival. Alara had been raised in a pack surrounded by other wolves dependent on the collective for everything from food to warmth. Her wolf, that small, timid creature, had never learned to hunt for more than scraps fallen from the Alpha's table. She ate bitter roots that she dug from frozen ground, her fingers turning blue as she clawed through ice and dirt. She drank water from half-frozen streams, the cold stabbing into her teeth and throat like needles. Her body shook with constant shivers that she could not control, violent tremors that rattled her bones. The pain of the rejection was a physical presence that never left her. It sat in her chest like a shard of broken glass grinding against her heart with every breath. The wound where the bond had been torn away refused to heal. It ached constantly, a phantom limb that had been crudely amputated without anesthesia. Her wolf was silent. The trauma had sent it into a deep protective hibernation, retreating so far into her subconscious that she could barely sense its presence. Without her wolf, she could not shift. She could not hunt properly. She could not tap into the enhanced senses that might have helped her survive. She was, for all intents and purposes, human, and she was dying. On the eighth day, a mountain lion found her. She had been foraging near a rocky outcropping, searching for anything edible beneath the snow. The cat appeared from nowhere, a tawny blur of muscle and hunger. It was starving, driven down from the higher peaks by the brutal winter, and it saw her as easy prey. Its yellow eyes fixed on her with the flat, emotionless gaze of a predator that has already decided its next meal. She ran, her legs burned with exhaustion. Her lungs screamed for air. The cat's heavy footfalls pounded behind her, growing closer with every heartbeat. She could hear its breathing, feel its hunger, sense its certainty that she would fall. She did not see the cliff. One moment she was running, the next the ground vanished beneath her feet. She tumbled down a rocky embankment, her body striking stones and roots and ice. Pain exploded through her as something in her left leg twisted wrong. She crashed through branches, tore through snowdrifts, and finally landed in a thicket of snow-laden pines at the bottom of a ravine. Above her, the mountain lion paced at the edge of the drop, its snarled yellow eyes gleaming in the winter light, frustrated by the escape of its prey. But the slope was too steep, the terrain too treacherous, even for a creature of its agility. After long minutes of pacing and growling, it turned and disappeared back into the wilderness to seek easier prey. Alara lay in the snow, broken and weeping. Blood seeped from a gash on her forehead, hot against her freezing skin. Her leg throbbed with every heartbeat, the pain radiating up through her hip and spine. The cold was seeping into her bones, promising a peaceful end to her suffering. "Just close your eyes," it whispered. "Just let go. The pain will stop. Everything will stop." This is it, she thought. This is where the rejected Omega dies. Alone on a mountain, forgotten by everyone, mourned by no one. But as the sun began to set and the shadows lengthened around her, a sound reached her ears. Water, running water somewhere close. She did not know where she found the strength. Perhaps it was stubbornness, the same stubborn streak that had kept her going through 20 years of servitude. Perhaps it was the last flicker of her dormant wolf refusing to give up even when everything seemed lost. Perhaps it was simply the refusal to give Garrett Hale the satisfaction of her death. She crawled, dragging her injured leg, ignoring the sharp rocks that tore at her palms. She pulled herself through the snow. The sound grew louder, closer. A promise of something, though she could not have said what. She pushed through a curtain of frozen ivy and found salvation. A small grotto-like cavern was hidden behind a frozen waterfall. The entrance was nearly invisible, concealed by the ice and the hanging vines. Inside, the space was dry, deep, protected from the wind that howled across the mountain slopes. A natural fortress, a den, home. Alara dragged herself into the darkness and collapsed on the stone floor. She slept for 2 days. When she woke, she was still alive. Somehow, impossibly, against all odds and reason, she was still alive. And she decided that if the mountain wanted to kill her, it would have to try harder. The next 3 months were a crucible. They were the forge that melted down everything Alara had been and reshaped her into something entirely new. At first, she could barely walk. Her leg had been badly twisted in the fall, and every step sent waves of pain up through her hip and spine. But she forced herself to move. She gathered firewood with gritted teeth. She collected water from the stream that fed the frozen waterfall. She ate snow when she was too weak to make the journey outside. Her wolf remained silent, dormant, perhaps dead. So Alara learned to survive as a human. She watched the mountain goats that lived on the high ridges. For hours she would lie motionless in the snow, studying their movements, memorizing the paths they took across the treacherous terrain. They knew where the ice was thin. They knew where the rocks would hold. They had survived these mountains for generations, and they held knowledge that no pack had ever taught her. She learned from them. She watched the hawks that circled overhead. Their sharp eyes could spot a rabbit from hundreds of feet in the air. She followed their gaze, marking the places where prey hid beneath the snow, learning to read the landscape as they did. She learned from them, too. Her first kill was a squirrel. She caught it in a crude snare made from stripped bark and twisted vines, a trap she had designed through trial and error over days of failed attempts. When she pulled the small body from the trap, she vomited. The act of taking life, even for survival, felt wrong in ways she could not articulate. She had never killed before. She had never been allowed to hunt, but she ate it anyway. Raw because she had not yet learned to make fire. The meat was stringy and gamey, but her body thanked her for it, the first real protein she had consumed in weeks. She did not vomit the second time, or the third. By the fourth, she felt nothing but gratitude for the sustenance. As the weeks passed, her body began to change. The soft, submissive physiology of an omega hardened. Her hands, once delicate from years of mending clothes, grew calloused from climbing rock faces and setting traps. Her muscles, lean from a lifetime of servitude, became dense and defined from the constant physical demands of survival. She lost the softness in her face. The roundness that had made her look young and harmless melted away, revealing sharp cheekbones and a jaw set with determination. Her eyes, once timid and downcast, developed a sharpness that had never been there before. She was no longer the girl who had stood in the shadows of Stone Creek Lodge, but the transformation was not just physical. The solitude was a different kind of pain, a vast, echoing emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. She had been lonely in her pack, but she had never been truly alone. There had always been other voices, other scents, other heartbeats nearby, even if they belonged to wolves who despised her. Here there was nothing but the wind and the stone and the endless silence of the mountains. She talked to herself sometimes just to hear a voice. She sang the songs she remembered from childhood, her voice cracking on the high notes, the melodies echoing off the cave walls. She carried on conversations with her absent wolf, even though it never responded. The loneliness was almost worse than the cold. Almost, but in that emptiness, something new began to grow. Without the constant weight of her pack's contempt, without the daily reminders of her worthlessness, without Garrett Hale's cruelty echoing in her ears, Alara began to discover who she actually was. She was resourceful. She could solve problems that would have stumped wolves twice her size, finding solutions through creativity rather than brute strength. She was patient. She could wait for hours in freezing conditions for a single opportunity, learning to still her body and her mind in ways she had never imagined possible. She was determined. She could push through pain that would have broken stronger wolves, refusing to give up when everything inside her screamed for surrender. These qualities had always been there, hidden beneath the mask of submission. But in Stone Creek, they had been liabilities. An Omega was not supposed to be clever or patient or determined. An Omega was supposed to be invisible, compliant, forgettable. Here on the mountain, those qualities were the only things keeping her alive. The rogue wolf came on a night when the blizzard howled like a living thing. Alara had been in her cave for nearly 3 months. She had built up stores of dried meat strips of rabbit and squirrel hung from crude racks she had fashioned from branches. She had learned to make fire using friction and tinder, a skill that had taken her weeks to master. She had even begun to think of this frozen grotto as home. The wolf burst through the frozen ivy curtain without warning. It was huge, gaunt with hunger, its ribs visible beneath matted gray fur that had not been groomed in years. Its eyes were wild, rolling with a madness that comes from too long alone in the wilderness, too long without pack, too long with nothing but its own howling thoughts for company. Foam flecked its wound, and a constant growl rumbled from its chest. A rogue, a wolf driven insane by isolation, by the absence of the pack bonds that kept wolves sane. It had become nothing more than hunger and instinct, a monster wearing the shape of what it had once been. It saw her and charged. In the old days, in her old life, Alara would have screamed. She would have cowered. She would have presented her throat in submission and prayed for mercy that would never come. But the old Alara had died on that rocky slope 3 months ago. The new Alara grabbed the fire-hardened spear she had been whittling for weeks. The rogue leaped, and something inside Alara snapped. Not broke, not shattered, snapped into place. She opened her mouth and roared. It was not an Omega's whimper. It was not a submissive cry for mercy. It was a guttural, primal sound that came from the deepest part of her soul. A sound that said, I have survived everything this mountain could throw at me. I have earned my place here. I will not die to you. Her wolf woke up. It shot forward from the depths where it had been hiding, not cowering, not timid, but burning with a fury that matched her own. 3 months of dormancy had not weakened it. The isolation had not killed it. It had been waiting, gathering strength, preparing for this moment. The shift took her by surprise. One moment she was human standing with a spear in her hands. The next she was wolf. But not the wolf she remembered. The small gray creature that had always hidden inside her was gone as if it had never existed. In its place stood something larger, leaner, faster. Her fur was no longer the dull gray of submission, the color of ash and surrender. It was silver, pure gleaming silver like moonlight, given physical form. She met the rogue in midair. The fight was brutal. The rogue was larger, driven by hunger and madness with nothing to lose. But Alara was faster. She was fighting for her territory, her home, her survival. She was fighting for everything she had built over 3 months of suffering, for the life she had clawed out of the mountain's frozen grip. She had earned this cave with blood and tears. She would not surrender it. Her jaws found the rogue's throat. She bit down. The fight ended. Afterward, Alara shifted back to human form and sat for a long time beside the body of the wolf she had killed. Her hands were shaking. Blood matted her silver blonde hair, both hers and the rogue's, but she was alive. She was alive and she had won. She looked down at her chest at the place where the rejection scar still lingered. The wound was still there. The memory of that night would never fully fade, would always leave its mark on her soul. But it no longer dominated her. She was not Alara the rejected. She was Alara V of the mountain. The biggest change came the next morning. Alara woke before dawn and stepped outside her cave to greet the sunrise. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the world blanketed in fresh snow. The peaks of the Blackwood Range glowed pink and gold in the early light, beautiful beyond anything she had ever seen in Stone Creek. She stretched, feeling the pleasant ache of muscles that had been pushed to their limits. Her wolf stirred contentedly inside her, no longer dormant, no longer afraid. They were one, now human and beast unified in a way they had never been before. Then she caught a scent on the wind. She frowned, turning her head to follow it. The fragrance was unusual, compelling, beautiful in a way she could not explain. Wild ozone like the air before a lightning strike. Ancient stone, cold and eternal. Night-blooming jasmine, sweet and intoxicating. And beneath it all, something that shimmered like liquid moonlight in her mind's eye. Where was it coming from? She searched the area around her cave, sniffing at rocks and trees, trying to locate the source. The scent seemed to be everywhere. It filled her nostrils, coated her tongue, wrapped around her like a second skin. Finally, she stopped. She lifted her own wrist to her nose, and she understood. The scent was her. The meek chamomile and rain of her old life was gone, burned away by the mountain's crucible. In its place was this new fragrance, wild and powerful and utterly unlike anything she had ever smelled on another wolf. She did not know what it meant. She only knew that something fundamental had changed inside her. The Omega who had been rejected by Stone Creek was gone as completely as if she had never existed. In her place stood something new, something that even she did not fully understand. Her scent carried on the wind, spreading across the mountain slopes, drifting down into the valleys below. A beacon in the wilderness. A call that she did not know she was making. Alara spent her days in a rhythm that had become as natural as breathing. She woke before dawn when the first light touched the peaks. She checked her snares, gathered her catches, reset her traps. She hunted when the opportunity arose, her skills growing sharper with each passing week. She maintained her cave, reinforced her defenses, gathered firewood for the endless cold nights. She was no longer surviving. She was living. The fear that had been her constant companion in Stone Creek had faded to a distant memory. She walked the mountain paths with her head held high. She climbed cliffs that would have terrified her 3 months ago. She faced down territorial creatures with the calm confidence of a predator who knew her own strength. Her wolf ran with her now, not hiding, not cowering, but glorying in the freedom of the wilderness. Together they explored the furthest reaches of the Blackwood Range. They discovered hidden valleys where hot spring bubbled up from deep underground. They mapped safe passages through treacherous terrain that would have killed a less careful wolf. The mountain had tried to kill her. Instead, it had made her strong. But sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep, she wondered if this was all there was. if she would spend the rest of her life alone on this frozen peak, if the price of freedom was eternal solitude. She thought about her pack, not with longing, not anymore, but with a kind of distant curiosity. Did they even remember her? Had Garrett Hale given her a single thought since the night he cast her out? Probably not. To them, she had been invisible. And invisible things did not merit remembrance. But she remembered. She remembered the cruelty and the laughter and the bone that had splattered grease across her tunic. She remembered the silver thread being torn from her chest. She remembered Garrett's amber eyes cold and hateful as he pronounced her worthless. Those memories did not hurt the way they once had. Now they were fuel. They reminded her of what she had overcome. They proved that she was stronger than anyone had ever believed. They showed her that the opinions of cruel wolves meant nothing compared to the truth of her own survival. She was not worthless. She had never been worthless. And somewhere far below the mountain where she had built her new life forces were moving that would change everything. An army was marching towards Stone Creek. A king was leading them, and his ancient wolf would soon catch a scent on the wind that would alter the course of history. Alphaking K.L. Thorne had not known peace in 15 years. He sat astride his massive warhorse on a ridge overlooking the eastern valleys, his dark cloak snapping in the mountain wind like a battle standard. Behind him, 500 of the most dangerous wolves on the continent waited in perfect formation. The Royal Guard. Elite warriors drawn from every territory under his rule, each one capable of killing a dozen lesser wolves without breaking stride. They had spent the past 3 weeks hunting rogue factions in the wilderness south of Stone Creek. The campaign had been brutal but necessary. Rogue camps burned to ash, feral wolves scattered or dead, the threat to the civilized packs eliminated with cold, methodical precision that had become the hallmark of his reign. Kyle should have felt satisfaction. Instead, he felt nothing but the familiar restless hunger that had gnawed at him since he first came into his power at 15 years old. At 30, K.L. Thorne was not merely an alpha. He was the alpha. His bloodline stretched back to the original wolves, the first pack from which all others had descended over countless generations. Where lesser alphas ruled valleys or mountain ranges proud of their small territories, K.L. commanded territories so vast that it took weeks to cross them on horseback. His wolf was a creature of nightmare and legend, a beast so large it dwarfed other wolves the way a grizzly dwarfs a fox. Its fur was the color of a moonless night, and its gaze held the pale fire of pure undiluted power. The Black Alpha, that was what they called him in whispers when they thought he could not hear. The king who ruled not through politics or inheritance, but through sheer overwhelming force. The wolf whose howl could freeze the blood of enemies miles away. But all that power came with a price. K.L. had no mate. For 15 years since the day his wolf first awakened in a surge of terrifying power, he had searched. He had attended every mate-marking ceremony in every territory under his domain. He had scented thousands of females, highborn daughters, and common wolves alike, beautiful and plain, strong and gentle. The moon goddess had shown him nothing. No silver thread, no pull of destiny, no other half to balance the raging inferno inside him. His wolf was in constant rebellion. Without a mate, the beast had no anchor, no calm center to offset its aggression. It burned inside him like a furnace with no release valve, demanding raging never satisfied. Every day was a battle to keep it contained. Every night was a war against the fury that threatened to consume him completely. His advisors worried. They whispered among themselves when they thought he was not listening. They had seen alphas go mad from unmated years, their wolves consuming their humanity until nothing remained but the beast. They urged him to take a chosen mate, a political alliance that might stabilize his rule even if it lacked the sacred bond. K.L. refused. He would have his fated mate, or he would have none at all. The moon goddess had not forgotten him. He had to believe that. Somewhere in his vast kingdom, she was waiting. The one wolf who could stand beside him. The one soul that could match his own. He just had to find her. Ronan Ashford, his beta and oldest friend, guided his horse alongside the king's mount. The beta was a large man scarred from decades of combat, with eyes that missed nothing, and a loyalty that had never wavered through 30 years of service. "The rogues are broken, Your Majesty," Ronan reported, his voice carrying the formal respect he always used in front of the troops. "They flee south toward the Badlands. We should press the advantage while they are scattered and leaderless." Kyle grunted acknowledgement, but his attention was elsewhere. His gaze had fixed on the jagged peaks to the north, the Blackwood Mountains, forbidden territory that even his authority did not formally extend to. A wilderness so dangerous that the local packs had declared it off limits generations ago, a place where only the desperate or the mad ventured. Something was pulling at him, a whisper at the edge of his consciousness, a thread so faint he could not be certain it was real. It had been nagging at him for hours, growing stronger as they made camp impossible to ignore. "We make camp here tonight," KL commanded, his voice, brooking no argument. "Send scouts to secure the perimeter. We ride south at dawn." Ronan frowned but nodded. "At once, Your Majesty." The beta turned to relay orders, and KL allowed himself to close his eyes. The whisper grew stronger. It was not a sound, not exactly. It was more like a scent carried on a wind that existed only in his mind. Something wild and sweet and utterly impossible. His wolf, usually a snarling presence barely contained behind his iron will, went suddenly still. Then it raised its massive head and did something it had never done in 15 years of restless fury. It whined, a sound of longing so deep and desperate that Kael's eyes snapped open in shock. His wolf had never made such a sound. It knew only rage and hunger and the endless drive to dominate. This vulnerability was utterly foreign. What in the name of the moon goddess was that? He inhaled deeply, trying to catch the scent that had triggered such an unprecedented reaction. The cold mountain air filled his lungs. Pine, snow, the distant smoke of campfires, the musk of 500 wolves and their horses. And beneath it all, so faint, he might have imagined it something else. A fragrance that should not exist. Lightning before it strikes. Mountains older than memory. Flowers that bloom only when the moon is full. Kale's heart stopped. He knew that combination. Every wolf knew it, though none had smelled it in living memory. It was the scent described in the oldest legends, the stories told to pups around midnight fires, dismissed as myth by practical wolves. The scent of a lunar, not a luna, the common term for an alpha's mate. Something far rarer, far more powerful. A being blessed directly by the moon goddess herself. It could not be real. It had to be his imagination, his desperate wolf conjuring fantasies from thin air after 15 years of searching. But the scent grew stronger. It drifted down from the Blackwood peaks like an invitation, like a challenge, like a promise that everything he had been searching for was waiting in those forbidden mountains. His wolf rose up inside him, no longer whining, but howling, a sound of pure agonized longing that echoed through his skull like thunder. Mine. The word exploded through his consciousness with the force of a physical blow. Mate. Mine. Find her now. KL gripped his saddle horns so hard the leather creaked beneath his fingers. His vision flickered, human sight warring with wolf sight as the beast fought for control. 15 years of discipline, 15 years of iron will, 15 years of keeping the monster leashed, all of it crumbling in the face of that impossible scent. My King, Ronan's voice cut through the chaos. The beta had returned, concern evident in his weathered features. Are you well? Your eyes, they are. Kale knew what Ronan was seeing, the pale fire of his wolf bleeding through into his human gaze, turning his eyes luminous in the fading light. A sign of imminent shift, a warning that the beast was very close to the surface. He forced himself to breathe, to think, to maintain some semblance of control. Change of plans. Kale's voice came out as a growl barely human. Take the royal guard and make camp in the valley below. Await my return. Ronan's eyes widened with alarm. Your Majesty, you cannot mean to go into the Blackwoods alone. The territory is uncontrolled, full of rogues, and worse. At least let me accompany you with a squad of our best warriors. I am not going into the Blackwoods. Kyle dismounted from his horse, his movements sharp and economical. He began unbuckling the heavy plate armor that marked his royal status, letting the pieces fall to the ground without care. I am going hunting. Hunting, Ronan's voice rose with alarm. Hunting for what? What did you scent? Kale did not answer. He stripped down to his leathers, shedding the weight of kingship along with his armor. He did not need steel for this hunt. He did not need soldiers or strategies or the trappings of civilization. He needed only his claws, his fangs, his wolf. My king. Ronan stepped forward, his hand raised in protest. Please, wait. Tell me what I should do if you do not return. Kale paused. He turned to look at his oldest friend, and Ronan took an involuntary step backward. The king's eyes were no longer human. They burned with pale fire, ancient and terrible, and utterly focused. If I am not back by dawn on the third day, Kale's voice was a harmony of man and beast, two beings speaking as one. You will bring my entire army into those mountains. You will burn every tree and crack every stone until you find what I am looking for. And what are you looking for? Kale smiled. It was not a reassuring expression. My mate, he shifted. The transformation was not the gradual process that most wolves experienced. It was an explosion of power, a detonation of barely contained energy that sent shockwaves rippling through the air. The horses screamed and reared. Seasoned warriors took involuntary steps backward. Where the man had stood, there was now a wolf. But calling it a wolf was like calling a hurricane a breeze. Kale's wolf form stood taller than a horse at the shoulder. Its fur was darkness given physical form, a void that seemed to drink in the light. Its eyes blazed with pale fire, ancient and terrible, and utterly focused on the distant peaks. The creature raised its massive head and inhaled. The scent flooded through him clearer now, pulling at him like a rope tied around his soul. Wild and sweet and calling to him across miles of frozen wilderness. Mate. The wolf lunged forward and then it was gone. A shadow vanishing into the trees, moving faster than any creature had a right to move, driven by an instinct older than thought. Behind it, 500 elite warriors stared in stunned silence at the space where their king had been. Ronan Ashford stood motionless for a long moment. Then he began shouting orders. Whatever the king had scented, whatever had driven him into the Forbidden Mountains, Ronan would be ready. If his king did not return, he would tear those peaks apart, stone by stone. But something in his gut told him that Kale Thorne would return, and that nothing in the realm would ever be the same. Alara was checking her rabbit snares on the high ridge when the scent hit her. She froze, her hand still extended toward the trap, every muscle in her body going rigid with sudden terror. This was not the bitter, feral smell of a rogue. She had learned that scent well over the past months, the stench of madness and desperation. This was different. This was the scent of a midnight storm rolling across endless forests, ancient trees that had stood for centuries. Authority so absolute, it made the mountain beneath her feet feel small and fragile. This was the scent of an alpha, but not just any alpha. Alara had grown up around Garrett Hale. She knew what alpha power smelled like. It was dominance and control and the promise of violence. This was something beyond that. This was alpha the way a wildfire was fire, the way an avalanche was snow. The same basic element magnified to a scale that defied comprehension. Terror flooded through her, cold and familiar. Had Garrett found her? Had he sent someone after her, or worse, had he come himself, tracking her across the wilderness to finish what his rejection had started? She scrambled backward, abandoning her snares, her silver-pelted wolf pacing frantically beneath her skin. Every instinct screamed the same word: hide. She ran for her cave, moving faster than she had moved in months. The frozen waterfall loomed ahead, promising safety, promising concealment. She dove through the curtain of ice and crawled into the deepest, darkest recess of her den. She pulled her cured furs over her body, trying to suppress the scent that she now knew was a beacon, broadcasting her location to any wolf with senses sharp enough to follow it. Please. She prayed to the moon goddess she had cursed 100 times since that night in the lodge. Please do not let him find me. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sound was the muffled crash of the waterfall and the hammering of her own heart. Then the crashing stopped. The water, which had been falling steadily for as long as Alara had lived in this cave, simply ceased, as if some immense force had frozen it solid in an instant. The silence that followed was the most terrifying thing she had ever experienced. A shadow fell over the cave entrance. It was enormous. It blocked the winter light, completely plunging the grotto into darkness. For a moment, Alara could not understand what she was seeing. The shape was too large to be a wolf, too large to be a bear, too large to be anything that should exist in the natural world. Then the shadow moved, and she understood. A man ducked under the low overhang and stepped into her home. He was not Garrett Hale. This stranger was something else entirely. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with his shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the cave. His clothes were simple black leathers, soaked from pushing through the waterfall, but they did nothing to diminish the raw power that radiated from him in waves that pressed against her skin like physical force. His hair was as dark as his wolf's pelt, cut short and practical. His face was all sharp angles and hard planes, handsome in the way that a drawn blade was handsome. Beautiful and deadly in equal measure. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. They burned with pale fire, luminous in the darkness, with no trace of human color remaining. He did not look at her, not immediately. Instead, he stood in the center of her cave chest, heaving from his run, and breathed deeply. Jasmine. He murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone beneath her. And stone, and moonlight made manifest. He turned, and that terrible gaze found her instantly. She knew she was invisible in the darkness. She knew she was buried under furs, her sense suppressed as much as she could manage. None of it mattered. He looked directly at her hiding place with the certainty of a predator who has already caught its prey. "Come out," he commanded. It was not a request. The words hit her like a physical force pressing down on her shoulders, demanding obedience. Her omega instincts, the ones she thought had been burned away by months of survival, screamed at her to comply, to submit, to crawl forward and bare her throat. But the mountain had taught her defiance. She stayed where she was, her hand finding the hilt of her knife beneath the furs. A low growl started in his chest. The sound was barely human, more beast than man, and it promised consequences she did not want to imagine. "I will not ask again." He took one step forward and tore the furs away from her hiding place. Alara was revealed. She lay coiled like a snake, ready to strike, her knife extended toward his throat, her winter gray eyes wide with terror but burning with defiance. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the stranger spoke, and his voice was rough with something that sounded almost like confusion. "You are an Omega." The word hit her like a blow. Even here, miles from any pack, the label found her. The curse that had defined her entire life. "Go away." She spat, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is my territory. You are not welcome here." The stranger stared at her. Then impossibly he laughed. It was not a cruel laugh like Garrett's had been. It was a sound of genuine disbelief, as if she had said something so absurd that he could not process it. "Your territory," he repeated. "You claim this mountain against me. I do not care who you are." Alara forced herself to hold that burning gaze, though every instinct begged her to look away. "I know what you are. You are an alpha. You command. You take. You will get nothing from me. Nothing." His voice softened. His wolf, she realized with growing unease, was not threatening her. It was fascinated, captivated by this fierce, dirty creature who refused to submit when any sane wolf would have been groveling at his feet. "I've followed your scent for 2 days," he said, stepping closer despite the knife pointed at his chest. "I crossed Dead Man's Pass in a blizzard because of it. That scent is the only thing that has mattered to me in 30 years of existence." He paused, his luminous eyes boring into hers. "And you smell of chamomile." Alara's blood ran cold. "How do you know that?" That was her old scent, her pack scent, the fragrance of submission and worthlessness that had marked her as the lowest of the low. It should have been gone, replaced by the new scent that had emerged after her transformation. "It is buried deep," he said, inhaling again, his nostrils flaring. "Under this power, under the jasmine and stone. But it is there like a ghost of who you were." He crouched before her, bringing his face level with hers. This close, she could see the individual flecks of light in his eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw, the way his pulse beat in his throat. He was not just an alpha. He was the most powerful wolf she had ever encountered. And he was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in existence. "What pack are you from?" "I have no pack." The words came out bitter, tasting of ash in old pain. "I have not had a pack for 3 months. Every funnel has a pack. I was rejected." The word hung in the air between them. She saw his reaction, the flash of something in those burning eyes. Surprise, then confusion, then something darker that made the stone walls of her cave groan as if the mountain itself was responding to his emotion. "Rejected," he breathed. "Someone rejected you." It was not a question, yes. Who, it does not matter. He is nothing to me now. Who, he roared the word, and the alpha command behind it was so powerful that it drove Alara to her knees. Her hands flew to her ears, but it was useless. The command was not sound, it was force. Pure, undiluted authority that crushed her resistance like a hammer crushing glass. Garrett. She cried out tears of pain and humiliation welling in her eyes. Alpha Garrett Hale of the Stone Creek Pack. He rejected me. He called me worthless. He threw me away to die. The stranger went very still. Stone Creek, yes. Garrett Hale, yes. He said those words to you. He rejected the bond. He called you worthless. Yes. The stranger rose to his full height, and then the cave began to shake. It started as a tremor, a subtle vibration in the stone floor. Then it grew. The walls groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling. Alara's carefully stacked firewood tumbled and scattered. The stranger was not moving. He was simply standing there, his hands at his sides, his burning eyes blazing with an emotion so intense that reality itself seemed to warp around him. Rage. Pure, absolute, world-ending rage. He knew what Garrett Hale had done. He understood the magnitude of the crime. And some part of him, some ancient primal part that existed beyond logic or reason, was responding with fury, because Alara was his fated mate, his other half, the one soul in all the world that was meant to stand beside him. And someone had thrown her away like garbage. He is a fool. The stranger's voice was deadly calm, more terrifying than his roar had been. And his pack will be dust by sunrise. No. Alara scrambled forward, grabbing his arm without thinking. It was like grabbing warm granite, solid and immovable. No, you cannot. It is not their fault. It was just me. I was the weak one. I was the Omega. He had every right to reject someone so far beneath his station. Stop. The word cut through her rambling like a blade. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. The rage in his eyes did not diminish, but something else joined it. Something softer. Something that made her heart ache in ways she did not understand. It was never just you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Do you understand? It was never just you. He covered her hand with his own. The contact was electric, a spark that jumped between them, igniting something that had been waiting to catch fire since the moment he entered her cave. Garrett Hale did not just reject an Omega. He pulled her to her feet, his gaze intense, possessive, and burning with a certainty that terrified her. He rejected my queen. You're what? She did not understand, could not understand. She was nobody, less than nobody, a rejected Omega who had barely survived the winter. But the stranger was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in existence. My name is K.L. Thorne, he said, and I am the Alpha King. Alara stopped breathing. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. K.L. Thorne, the Black Alpha ruler of the continent, commander of armies legend, made flesh, the wolf that mothers used to frighten children into obedience. The king that other alphas spoke of in whispers, and he was standing in her cave holding her hand, calling her his queen. That is impossible, she whispered. It is the truth. I am an Omega, the lowest of the low. You are the most powerful wolf in existence. The goddess would never match us. You are my mate. The bond between us is not a silver thread that can be torn apart by lesser wolves. It is a chain of steel that nothing can break. Not rejection, not distance, not the cruelty of fools. He lifted her hand to his face and inhaled her scent directly from her skin. I have searched for you for 15 years, he breathed. I have attended every ceremony in my kingdom, scented every unmated female, found nothing but emptiness. His luminous eyes met hers. Until now. Alara wanted to pull away, wanted to run, wanted to hide in the deepest part of her cave and pretend this was not happening. But she could feel it. The bond. It was not the fragile thread that Garrett had torn apart. This was something else entirely. Something vast and powerful and terrifying in its intensity. No, she whispered the word coming out broken and desperate. No, I will not be rejected again. I belong to no one. I will not be claimed and discarded. I will not survive it twice. You will not be rejected. You do not know that. You do not know me. I am broken. I am damaged. I am nothing but scars and survival. You are mine. He said it simply. Absolutely. As if stating a fact as immutable as the rising of the sun. And you are coming with me. Before she could protest, before she could fight, before she could do anything at all, K.L. Thorne lifted her into his arms and carried her out of the cave. Into the blinding winter sunlight. into a future she had never imagined, into a world that would never be the same. The journey back to the Royal Guard's encampment was a silent war of wills. Kale refused to let her walk, carrying her against his chest with an ease that made her feel simultaneously protected and imprisoned. His arms were iron bands around her, unyielding, inescapable. Alara remained rigid in his grasp, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. The Alpha King, her mate, the most powerful wolf on the continent, had tracked her to a cave in the Forbidden Mountains because her scent had called to him across impossible distances. Part of her, the Omega she had been, was dizzy with his proximity. His scent wrapped around her like a blanket of midnight storms in ancient forests, promising a safety she had never known. Her wolf awakened and powerful, pressed against her consciousness, yearning toward him with an intensity that frightened her. But the other part of her, the woman who had survived the Blackwoods, screamed warnings. This was just a different cage. Grander, perhaps, gilded with royal titles and ancient prophecies, but a cage nonetheless. She had fled Stone Creek to be free. She had nearly died on this mountain to escape the fate of a rejected Omega. And now another Alpha had found her, claim to her, was carrying her toward a life she had not chosen. She would not submit. Not again. Not ever. When they broke through the tree line into the valley below, they were met by the sight of 500 elite warriors. The Royal Guard had made camp with military precision, tents arranged in perfect rows, horses picketed in organized lines, sentries posted at regular intervals, their eyes sharp despite the long night. Ronan Ashford rushed forward, his weathered face a mask of relief that quickly shifted to bewilderment as he saw what his king carried. He stared at Alara, at her wild silver-blonde hair tangled with leaves and ice, at her clothes of rough-stitched animal pelts, at her fierce gray eyes that held neither submission nor welcome. "My king," Ronan's voice faltered. "You found her." "I did." Kael's voice rang with possessive pride that made Alara want to sink into the ground and disappear. "This is Alara." He said her name like it was sacred, like it was a prayer he had been waiting his entire life to speak. "She is mine. She is your Luna Queen." The 500 warriors stared. A murmur rippled through them like wind through grass. This creature, this wild, feral-looking woman in animal skins, their queen Alara felt their doubt like a physical weight, their confusion, their barely concealed disdain. She was nothing to them, an oddity their king had dragged from the wilderness, a mystery that did not fit their understanding of how the world should work. "Prepare my carriage," Kael commanded, his voice cutting through the whispers. "We ride for Ethelgard. Now." The journey to the capital took 4 days. Alara was kept in the king's personal carriage, a wheeled fortress of heated comfort that she had never imagined could exist. Silk cushions padded every surface. Thick furs blocked the mountain cold. Servants brought food at regular intervals. Rich dishes that made her stomach ache after months of raw meat and bitter roots. She refused the silks they offered her. She kept her leathers and furs, the clothes she had made with her own hands. She ate the food, though unable to resist after so long with so little. Kael rode outside his presence, a constant weight that she could feel even through the carriage walls. He did not enter her space, did not press his claim, but she knew he was there, watching, waiting, patient as a predator who knows his prey cannot escape. When they finally reached Ethelgard, Alara understood why they called it a fortress. The capital of Carol Thorne's kingdom was built into the side of a mountain. Black stone walls rose hundreds of feet into the air, carved directly from the living rock by generations of wolves who had shaped the mountain itself to their will. Towers spiraled toward the clouds like grasping fingers. Gates of iron and silver marked the entrance, large enough to admit an army. It was not a pack lodge. It was a seat of power that had stood for centuries, that would stand for centuries more. Alara was given chambers larger than the entire Stone Creek Lodge. The bed was so vast she could have fit a dozen people in it, so soft that she was afraid to sleep in it. Windows taller than she was looked out over the kingdom below, a sprawl of civilization that seemed to stretch to the horizon. But despite the luxury, despite the warmth, despite the servants who answered her every need, she knew the truth. She was a prisoner, a beautiful, well-fed prisoner in a cage of stone and silk. On the second night, Kael came to her chambers. He entered without knocking, his presence filling the room like a thundercloud. He was dressed simply dark clothes without the trappings of royalty, but nothing could diminish the power that radiated from him in waves. You are afraid, he stated. I am not. Ilara stood by the vast window looking out over the kingdom that sprawled beneath the fortress. Thousands of lights twinkled in the darkness, an entire civilization all answering to the wolf behind her. You are, he said again. You tremble when I am near. You flinch when I speak. You think I am him. You think I am Garrett Hale wearing a different face. She turned to face him, her chin raised in defiance. You are both alphas, she said. You command. You take. You see something you want, and you claim it without asking permission. You did not ask me, K.L. Thorne. You told me what I was to you. His luminous eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or might have been pain. I am nothing like him. Then prove it. The challenge hung between them like a blade. Kael took a step forward, his voice dropping to a growl. He threw you away. I crossed a mountain range for you. He broke your bond. I am trying to forge one. He called you worthless. I call you priceless. And yet here I stand, Alara shot back. In a gilded cage wearing a title I did not ask for, bonded to a wolf I did not choose. I do not want it. Laura interrupted, her voice cracking with emotion she could not suppress. I was finally free. I was finally myself. I survived the wilderness on my own terms. I built a life from nothing. And then you came and took it all away. She gestured at the opulent room around them. Now I am not a Lar of the mountain. I am just your queen. A title, a possession, a thing to be displayed and protected and controlled. Kale's rage flickered, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. What did he do to you? He whispered. What did they do to make you hate your own nature so completely? My nature is to be weak, she said, the words tasting like poison. My nature is to be a servant, to submit, to be rejected. No. A new voice spoke from the doorway. Both Kael and Alara turned. An old woman stood at the entrance to the chambers. Her hair was white as mountain snow, cascading past her shoulders in waves that seemed to glow in the candlelight. Her eyes were a pale, milky blue, the eyes of someone who saw far more than the physical world. She wore the robes of a royal seer. Ancient symbols embroidered the fabric. Crystals hung from thin chains around her neck, catching the light and scattering it in rainbow patterns across the walls. Seer Lenora. Kael's voice held respect that Alara had not heard before. What brings you to these chambers at this hour? I felt her distress. The old woman said, walking slowly into the room. Her movements were careful, measured, but there was nothing frail about her presence. I felt it echoing through the stones of this fortress like a bell being struck. She stopped before Alara and inhaled. For a long moment she was silent. Then her pale eyes widened. By the goddess, she breathed. The legends are true. What legends? Kael demanded. The seer turned to look at him, and there was something like awe in her ancient face. You were right to follow the scent, my king. Right to cross the forbidden mountains. Right to bring her here, whatever she might think of your methods. She turned back to Alara, and her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Child, you are not weak. You are not worthless. You are the most powerful wolf on this continent, save for the king himself. Alara stared at her, uncomprehending. What you scented, my king, Lenora continued, addressing Kyle while keeping her eyes on Alara, was not Omega. What Garrett Hale smelled was the suppression of her power. He smelled the cage, not the creature trapped inside it. She reached out and gently touched Alara's arm. Once in 1,000 generations, the moon goddess bypasses the alphas. She bypasses the betas. She pours her own pure essence directly into a single Omega vessel. The seer's voice took on the cadence of prophecy, words that had been spoken and repeated across centuries. This wolf is not a peacemaker, though she can bring peace. She is a balancer. She is the only being in existence with the power to soothe an Alpha King's rage. And she is the only one with the strength to match his power and stand beside him as a true equal. Kael's face had gone pale. A lunar Omega, he whispered. That is a myth. A story told to children. It is no myth, Lenora said firmly. The chamomile scent she carried in Stone Creek was the mark of her suppression, a heavy blanket thrown over a bonfire. When she was rejected, when she fled to the mountains and broke free of her pack's influence, her true essence was finally allowed to bloom. She looked at Alara with something approaching reverence. The jasmine and moonlight you smell now is not just power, child. It is the scent of the moon itself. You are the heart of the moon, the only one who can be the true mate of the Black Alpha. Alara's legs felt weak. She reached out to steady herself on the windowsill, her mind reeling with information she could not process. "But I am just Alara," she whispered. "You were just Alara," Lenora said gently. "Now you are everything." The seer's expression grew grave. "But this power comes with the prophecy states that if the lunar omega is found but not properly bonded, or if she bonds with a lesser alpha who cannot match her power, her essence will curdle. It will become a poison that will not just destroy a single pack." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "It will create a schism that will tear our entire people apart." Kale's burning eyes found Alara's gray ones, and she saw understanding dawn in his face. A terrible, earth-shaking realization. "Garrett Hale," he said slowly, "did not just reject an Omega. No," Lenora confirmed. "He nearly destroyed the world." The seer excused herself shortly after leaving them alone with the weight of revelation. Silence filled the chamber. Alara looked at her own hands, the calluses, the scars, the evidence of her survival. A lunar Omega, a myth made flesh, the only wolf who could stand beside the most powerful alpha in existence. It was impossible. And yet, she could feel it, the power humming beneath her skin, the strength that had awakened in that cave when she killed the rogue, the scent that had called a king across mountains. Maybe it was not impossible at all. Maybe it had always been true. And maybe that was the most terrifying thing of all. News travels fast when it involves a king. The rumor that K.L. Thorne had found his mate spread across the continent like wildfire. Within a week, every pack from the eastern coast to the western mountains had heard some version of the story. The Alpha King had ridden into the forbidden Blackwoods. He had emerged with a wild woman, a mountain witch, some called her. A feral Omega, said others. A goddess made flesh, whispered the most superstitious. The truth was stranger than any rumor, but one wolf heard the news and recognized the name. Garrett Hale Alpha of Stone Creek sat in his lodge and listened to his scout's report with a growing sense of disbelief. Alara, the weak, pathetic Omega he had publicly rejected, the worthless creature he had cast out to die in the mountains. She was alive, and she was with the king. For a long moment, Garrett said nothing. His amber eyes stared into the fire, his jaw working as he processed this impossible information. Then he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "The king stole what was mine," he said softly. "She was my fated mate, from my territory. He trespassed into lands that border mine and took her." "Alpha," his beta said carefully. "You rejected her publicly. The entire pack witnessed it. She is no longer yours by any law of our people." "I rejected her as Luna," Garrett interrupted, his voice sharp. "Not as mine. That was a test of her devotion that she failed." He stood pacing before the fire. The truth which he would never speak aloud was simpler. He had sensed Alara's potential even then, a flicker of something beneath the chamomile scent, power that he wanted to control, to drain, to use for his own purposes. His rejection had been calculated. He had planned to destroy her spirit completely, to reduce her to such worthlessness that no one would notice when he took her to his private chambers. A secret source of power that would answer only to him. He had not expected her to run. He certainly had not expected her to survive. And he absolutely had not expected the Alpha King to find her first. "Send a message," Garrett commanded, his mind racing with possibilities. "We demand a Kratos, a formal judgment before the Council of Elders at Council Bluffs." His beta stared at him in horror. "A Kratos against the king, that is suicide, Alpha. If you are found to be in the wrong, the penalty is death. I will not be found in the wrong." Garrett's smile widened. "Think about it. He is a king. He must appear just. He must answer challenges to his authority or look like a tyrant who rules through fear alone." He turned to face his gathered wolves. "I will stand before the council and accuse him of theft. I will demand that Alara be returned to her rightful pack. And when she sees me, when she remembers who claimed her first, she will crawl back where she belongs." He believed it. In his arrogance, in his delusion, he truly believed that the broken Omega he had discarded would choose him over the most powerful wolf in existence. He did not know about the lunar prophecy. He did not understand what Alara had become. He only knew that something valuable had been taken from him. and he intended to get it back. The summons reached Ethelgard 3 days later. Kael read the formal declaration, and his resulting roar of rage shook the fortress to its foundations. Stones cracked, windows shattered, servants fled in terror from the throne room. He challenges me. Kael whispered, the parchment crumbling to ash in his superheated grip. He dares to challenge me. He accuses me of theft. He claims you are his. Alara, who had been brought to the throne room, stepped forward. Then let him have me, she said. Send me back. This is what I wanted anyway, to be left alone, to be free. Let me return to the mountains, and you two can settle your dispute without me. Kael turned on her, his eyes blazing with a fury that should have reduced her to ash. But beneath the fury, she saw something else. Pain. You would go, he said, his voice raw. You would leave. You would choose freedom over me. I would choose freedom over being a prize to be won by whoever proves strongest. You will never be free. Kael stepped closer, his voice breaking in a way she had never heard. Not like that. Do you not understand? You are the heart of the moon. Whether you are with me or with him, or alone in that cave, you will be hunted. Every alpha on this continent will eventually smell your power. They will come for you. They will tear you apart to possess you. He loomed over her, his rage coiling into a tight, controlled lethality. Garrett Hale set this in motion. He humiliated you. He broke you. He cast you out to die. And now he wants to drag you back like a possession he misplaced. What do you want? Alara demanded. I want you to watch. His luminous eyes bore into hers. I want you to stand at Council Bluffs and watch the wolf who called you worthless answer for his crimes. I want you to see him broken the way he tried to break you. I want you to understand that you are not a prize to be claimed. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands. You are a queen, and queens do not hide while lesser wolves decide their fate. Alara stared up at him, and for the first time since he had carried her from her cave, she did not see a cage. She saw a choice. Fine, she said. I will go to Council Bluffs. I will watch your judgment. Her gray eyes hardened. But understand this, Kael Thorne. Whatever happens there, I will make my own choice. Not because you command it, not because prophecy demands it, not because any alpha tells me who I am supposed to belong to, because I decide. Kael smiled. It was not the smile of a king claiming a prize. It was the smile of a wolf who had finally found an equal. Then we understand each other, he said. He turned to Ronan, who had been standing silently by the throne. Send our reply. We accept the Kratos. Council Bluffs. 3 days. The beta bowed and departed, and Alara, who had fled into the mountains to escape her fate, found herself walking toward it instead. Council Bluffs, where everything would be decided, where the rejected Omega would face the Alpha who had destroyed her, where the Alpha King would unleash his fury on the wolf who had discarded his mate, where Alara would finally choose her own destiny. One way or another, the world was about to change. Council Bluffs rose from the earth like the bones of a dead giant. The ancient plateau of wind-scoured granite had witnessed 1,000 judgments over the centuries. Here matters of high treason were settled. Here wars between pacts were declared or ended with blood or words. Here the laws of the moon goddess were interpreted and enforced by elders whose authority transcended any single alpha's rule. Today the Bluffs would witness something unprecedented, a challenge against the Alpha King himself. Alara stood at the edge of the plateau, the wind whipping her silver and black robes around her like living shadows. The formal garments of a lunar queen felt foreign against her skin after months in rough leather and animal pelts. These silks were too soft, too civilized, too much like the life she had fled. But she had to admit they made a statement. Below her, hundreds of wolves had gathered from every major pack in the region. They clustered in groups according to their allegiances, their combined sense creating a tapestry of musk and tension that hung heavy in the cold mountain air. News of the Kratos had spread faster than any rumor. No one wanted to miss the spectacle of an alpha challenging the king. On the eastern edge of the plateau, Kael Thorne stood with his royal guard at his back. 500 elite warriors in perfect formation, their armor gleaming in the pale winter sunlight. They did not need to posture or threaten. Their presence alone was a statement of overwhelming force that no wolf could ignore. Kael himself wore no armor. His black clothes were simple, unadorned, as if he considered this challenge beneath the dignity of royal trappings. His gaze swept across the assembled wolves with the calm certainty of a predator surveying prey. On the western edge, Garrett Hale had positioned his Stone Creek warriors. They numbered perhaps 50, a pitiful showing compared to the Royal Guard, but Garrett stood at their head with the smug confidence of a wolf who believed he held all the cards. He had dressed for the occasion. Fine furs draped his broad shoulders, gold chains glinted at his throat. His dark hair was perfectly arranged, his amber eyes bright with anticipation. When those eyes found Alara, his smile widened. She felt nothing. 3 months ago, that smile would have turned her knees to water. 3 months ago, his attention would have made her heart race with desperate, foolish hope. Now she looked at Garrett Hale and saw only the small, cruel creature he had always been. A wolf who mistook cruelty for strength. A predator who could only feel powerful by tearing down those weaker than himself. Elder Harmon stepped forward, the same wolf who had presided over her rejection. His ancient voice carried across the plateau with supernatural clarity, silencing the crowd. The Kratos begins. Silence fell over the assembled wolves. Alpha Garrett Hale, you have brought challenge against your king. This is a grave matter. If your accusations are found false, the penalty is death. Do you understand this and still wish to proceed? I do. Garrett's voice rang with false bravery. Then state your claim. Garrett strode to the center of the plateau, positioning himself where all could see him. He was playing to the crowd, Alara realized, performing for the lesser alphas who might be swayed by theatrical confidence. Your Majesty, he began, offering Kyle a bow that was just shallow enough to be insulting. Honored elders, assembled wolves, I come before you not as a rebel, but as a wronged alpha seeking justice. He paused for effect. 3 months ago, during our sacred mate marking ceremony, the moon goddess revealed my fated mate, a wolf from my own pack, a wolf I had known since childhood. His amber eyes found Alara again. Her name is Alara. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Every eye turned to the woman in silver and black who stood apart from both factions. She was promised to me by the goddess herself, Garrett continued. The bond was real, sacred, unbreakable by any law of our people. He turned to address the crowd directly, and then the Alpha King came to my territory. He trespassed into the forbidden Blackwood Mountains which border my lands. And he took her. The murmurs grew louder. He stole my fated mate. Garrett's voice rose with righteous indignation. He brought her to his fortress and claimed her as his own. This is theft. This is violation of the sacred bond. This is a crime against the moon goddess herself. He pointed at Kale, his arms steady, his expression one of wounded nobility. I demand justice. I demand that Alara be returned to her rightful pack, her rightful alpha. I demand that the king answer for his crimes. Silence followed his proclamation. Then Elder Harmon spoke. Alpha Garrett Hale, the word among the packs is that you rejected this mate, that you cast her out publicly during the very ceremony you describe. How do you answer this? Garrett's smile did not waver. A misunderstanding, his voice dripped with practiced sorrow. A test of devotion that was taken too literally. He began to pace, addressing the crowd like a lawyer making closing arguments. Yes, I rejected Alara as my Luna. The title of Luna carries enormous responsibility. It requires strength, wisdom, political acumen. Alara was young, inexperienced, not yet ready for such a burden. He spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. My rejection was never meant to be permanent. I planned to train her, to prepare her, to mold her into the Luna she was destined to become. His eyes found Alara once more, and his expression shifted to something that might have been tenderness if it had contained any genuine warmth. I was grooming her for greatness, not discarding her. The distinction is crucial. Several wolves in the crowd nodded. The explanation was plausible, even sympathetic. Alara felt sick. She remembered that night, the laughter, the thrown bones, the words that had shattered her soul. You are worthless. You do not exist. That was not grooming. That was destruction. But before she could speak, another voice cut through the cold air. You lie. Cale Thorne had not moved from his position. He had not raised his voice. But somehow his words carried across the plateau with more force than Garrett's theatrical proclamations. Every eye turned to the king. You speak of tests and training. Cale continued, his luminous gaze fixed on Garrett with predatory focus. But I found this woman near death in a cave. She had survived 3 months alone in the wilderness you supposedly controlled. She had been driven there by your rejection. He took a single step forward. She was not being trained, she was being destroyed. Garrett's confidence flickered, but he recovered quickly. The harshness of the mountains is a crucible. Perhaps my methods were extreme, but the results speak for themselves. Look at her now. She is stronger than she ever was under my pack's protection. You take credit for her survival. Kale's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. You who threw her to the wolves now claim her strength as your achievement. I claim nothing except what is mine by divine right. Garrett shot back. The bond was formed in my territory under my authority before my pack. That makes her mine. Whatever happened afterward does not change that fundamental truth. He turned to the elders. I call upon the council to enforce the sacred law. A fated mate belongs to the Alpha who received her. The king had no right to take her, no right to claim her, no right to name her his queen. His amber eyes burned with triumph. Return her to me. That is all I ask, justice, nothing more. Elder Harmon turned to Kale. Alpha King, how do you answer these charges? Kale was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Alara. Come here. It was not a command, not the Alpha voice that had driven her to her knees in the cave. It was a request, a choice. Alara walked forward, her silver robes trailing behind her. The crowd parted before her, wolves stepping aside as she passed, whether from respect or fear she could not tell. She stopped beside Kale, facing the elders and the assembled packs. This woman, Kale said, his voice carrying to every corner of the plateau, came to my territory of her own will. That is a lie, Garrett snarled. She fled into the mountains. Kale continued as if Garrett had not spoken. She survived there for 3 months without pack, without protection, without help from any wolf. When I found her, she did not beg for rescue. She pointed a knife at my throat and told me to leave her territory. A ripple of surprised murmurs ran through the crowd. I did not steal her, Kale said. I recognized her. The scent that called to me across mountains was not the scent of a mere Omega. It was the scent of my fated mate, my true lunar. The other half of my soul that I have searched for since I came of age 15 years ago. His luminous eyes swept across the assembled wolves. Garrett Hale did not lose something precious. He discarded it. He threw away what the moon goddess herself had given him. And now he wants it back, not because he values her, but because he cannot stand that someone else saw her worth. Kale turned to face Garrett directly. You called her worthless. I call her everything. That is the difference between us. Garrett's face had gone red with fury. Pretty words from a king who takes what he wants regardless of law or tradition. He spat. The bond was formed in my pack. That makes her mine. Ask anyone here. Ask the elders. Ask the goddess herself, he pointed at Alara. Tell them. His voice cracked with desperation, masquerading as the command. Tell them you belong to Stone Creek. Tell them you belong to Mia. Every eye turned to her. The plateau fell silent. This was the moment. The fulcrum upon which everything balanced. Alara looked at Garrett Hale, the Alpha who had destroyed her, the wolf who had called her worthless and meant it with every fiber of his being. Then she looked at Kale Thorne, the Alpha King who had claimed her, the wolf who had carried her from her cave and called her everything. 2 alphas, 2 futures, 2 cages of different design. But she was not the same Omega who had fled into the mountains. She was not the broken creature who had crawled into that cave to die. She was Alara of the mountain, survivor, warrior, wolf, and she would choose her own fate. He is telling the truth, her voice carried across the plateau clear and steady. Kale's head snapped toward her. Something flickered in his luminous eyes. Surprise, then pain. A flash of betrayal so raw it made her heart ache. Garrett's face split into a triumphant grin. You see, he crowed to the crowd. Even she admits that she belongs to. He is telling the truth. Alara repeated, cutting him off, that he knew I had power. Garrett's grin faltered. He sensed it. Alara continued, her voice gaining strength, even before the ceremony. He felt the potential in me, the spark of something that frightened him, something he wanted to control. She stepped forward, moving to the center of the plateau. But he did not want to train me. He did not want to groom me for greatness. Her gray eyes locked onto Garrett's amber ones. He wanted to hide me. The crowd's murmur grew louder. He called me worthless in front of the entire pack. Alara said, he humiliated me. He broke the bond so publicly, so completely, that no one would question when I disappeared. No one would ask where the worthless Omega had gone. She took another step toward Garrett, because he planned to take me anyway. In secret, in shame, he wanted to lock me away where no one would see, to use me as his private source of power, a battery to be drained whenever he needed strength. The murmur became a growl. Wolves from every pack were staring at Garrett with new eyes. The accusation Alara had leveled was one of the gravest crimes in their society. To misuse a fated bond to treat a mate as a tool rather than a partner was a perversion of everything the moon goddess represented. He did not want a mate. Alara said, her voice ringing with certainty. He wanted a prisoner. Lies. Garrett's composure shattered. His face twisted with fury as he stormed toward her, his alpha aura flaring. You are a feral witch, he screamed. The king has twisted your mind. He has filled your head with fantasies and delusions. He jabbed a finger at Kale. This is manipulation. This is propaganda. She was beneath notice when I rejected her, and she is beneath notice now except for what he has made her. The word hit Alara like a blow. Beneath notice. Another way of saying the same thing he had said that night. The same contempt. The same cruelty. But this time it did not break her. This time it lit a fire. She has not spoken a single lie. Kale's voice cut through the chaos cold as the granite beneath their feet. He moved forward, positioning himself beside Alara, but not in front of her. Not protecting her. Standing with her. I found her near death, he said, surviving on raw squirrel meat and melted snow. Dressed in animal skins she had stitched herself, fighting off rogue wolves with a fire-hardened spear. His luminous eyes swept across the crowd. That is not the result of training. That is the result of abandonment, of betrayal, of being thrown away like garbage by a wolf who did not deserve her. This is not for you to decide, Garrett shrieked, his composure completely gone. This is for the goddess, for the sacred bond. He spun to face the elders. I invoke the ancient right. I challenge the king, not for politics or territory. For her. His voice dropped to a feral growl, a fight to submission. The winner claims the mate. The crowd erupted in shocked exclamations. A direct challenge to the Alpha King was unprecedented, foolish beyond measure, suicide by any rational calculation. But Garrett Hale was beyond rationality. His obsession, his wounded pride, his desperate need to reclaim what had been taken from him had consumed whatever wisdom he might have possessed. Kale simply smiled. It was a slow, terrible expression. A smile that held all the cold of the grave. You challenge the Black Alpha, he said softly. You who cannot control a single valley. You who threw away the greatest gift the goddess ever granted. You challenge me. Kale shrugged off his cloak, revealing the powerful frame beneath. He carried no weapons. He needed none. I accept. The words had barely left his lips before he was airborne. The shift was instantaneous. One moment a man, the next a shadow given flesh and hunger. Massive beyond reason, with eyes that blazed like pale fire in the winter light. He collided with Garrett before the Stone Creek Alpha could even begin his own transformation. The impact echoed across the plateau like thunder. Garrett managed to shift mid-collision, his wolf form emerging in a desperate scramble of gray fur and snapping teeth. He was large by any normal standard, and Alpha in his prime, powerful and fierce. Against Kale Thorne, he was nothing. The Black Alpha's jaws found Garrett's flank and tore. Blood sprayed across the granite, steaming in the cold air. Garrett howled and twisted, trying to break free, but Kale was relentless. He was not fighting to win. He was punishing. Every bite, every slash, every crushing blow was calculated to inflict maximum pain without killing. He was making an example. Garrett's gray wolf form crumpled as Kale's massive jaws closed around his front leg. The crack of breaking bone echoed across the plateau. Garrett screamed a sound halfway between a wolf's howl and a human shriek of agony. He shifted back to human form, cowering on the stone blood pooling beneath him. His arm hung at a grotesque angle. His chest was torn. His face was a mask of terror. "Stop!" he shrieked. "I yield. I yield." Kale shifted back to human form. He stood over Garrett's broken body, not even breathing hard. His clothes were splattered with blood, but none of it was his own. His luminous eyes held no mercy, no satisfaction, nothing but cold judgment. You yield the fight, he said, his voice flat and final. But you have not yielded the claim. He turned to look at Alara. She stood where he had left her silver robes whipping in the wind, her gray eyes fixed on the scene before her. She did not look away from the blood. She did not flinch from the violence. She watched. By law, Kael said, addressing the elders without taking his eyes off Alara, the challenge is won. But the claim to a fated mate cannot be broken by combat alone. It must be relinquished by the claimant, or chosen by the claimed. He stepped back from Garrett's whimpering form. The choice is hers. Every wolf on the plateau turned to look at Alara. She walked forward. Her footsteps were steady, unhurried. The silver robes trailed behind her like the train of a coronation gown. The wind caught her pale hair, lifting it around her face in waves of silver gold. She stopped between the two alphas. Garrett lay broken at her feet, blood seeping into the stone, his amber eyes wide with pain and desperation. Kael stood behind her, his gaze burning with an intensity that could have melted steel. Two wolves, two futures, one choice. Garrett reached out with his unbroken arm, his fingers grasping toward her ankle. Ilara, he gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Please, have mercy. I was wrong, I was a fool. But I was your first, your alpha, your pack. Tears streamed down his face, cutting channels through the blood and dirt. Come home, he whispered. I will be better. I will treat you as you deserve. You called me worthless. Alara's voice was quiet, almost gentle. Garrett froze. She looked down at him, at this creature who had defined her entire existence for 20 years. This wolf who had been the center of her hopes and the architect of her destruction. You stood in front of our pack and you called me worthless, she said. You laughed while I broke. You threw bones at me like I was a dog begging for scraps. You watched me run into the mountains to die and you did not care. She crouched beside him, bringing her face close to his. You were right. Garrett's eyes widened with desperate hope. In your pack, I was worthless. She continued. I was a servant, a ghost, a wolf so small that no one even noticed when I disappeared. She stood. You did not reject me, Garrett Hale. You liberated me. She turned her back on him completely. She faced Kael. The Alpha King stood motionless, his luminous eyes fixed on her face. He did not speak, did not command, did not demand. He waited. You, Alara said, her voice carrying across the silent plateau. You are a cage. A muscle twitched in Kael's jaw. You are a tyrant. She continued. You are arrogant. You are possessive. You carried me from my home against my will. You claimed me without asking. You decided I was yours before you knew anything about me. The crowd held its breath. But you were honest, Alara said. You never lied to me. You never pretended to be something you were not. She took a step toward him. You found me in a cave covered in dirt and blood, holding a knife to your throat, and you did not see worthless. Another step. You saw me. She stopped directly before him, close enough to touch. You took me against my will, but you gave me a voice. You brought me here not to hide me, but to show me. You wanted me to see him answer for what he did. Her gray eyes met his luminous ones. I will not be your possession. Kael's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. But I will be your partner. She reached up and placed her hand on his chest directly over his heart. I will not be the lunar omega of prophecy because some ancient words demand it. I will not be the queen of Ethelgard because tradition requires it. I will not be yours because a bond formed without my consent. Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every ear on the plateau. I will be all of those things because I choose it. She looked at him, not as an omega to an alpha, not as a subject to a king. As an equal, I choose you, Kael Thorne. The moment the words left her lips, the world transformed. The bond that had been waiting, hovering incomplete, slammed into place with the force of 1,000 thunderbolts. It was not a silver thread, it was a torrent, a cascade of stars, a river of pure silver fire that poured through both of them, binding their souls together in ways that transcended physical reality. Kael's roar split the sky. It was a sound of agony and ecstasy intertwined, ripped from the deepest part of his being. His wolf and his man, separated for 15 years by the absence of their other half, finally merged into wholeness. The rage that had burned in him since adolescence did not disappear. It transformed. The calm of the moon poured into him through the bond, cooling the eternal fire without extinguishing it. For the first time in his life, K.L. Thorne felt peace. He fell to one knee, not in defeat, in reverence. Alara was glowing. A soft silver aura pulsed from her skin, spreading outward in waves that washed across the plateau. Wolves who had been tense with aggression felt their hackles lower. Old rivals who had been glaring at each other across the stone found their anger fading. The power of the lunar omega, the heart of the moon, the balance to the black alpha's darkness. Kyle rose, taking her hand in his, not pulling her, rising with her. He turned to face the assembled wolves. Behold, his voice rang across the plateau with new resonance, new authority, not the command of a tyrant, but the call of a true king. Not my queen, your Luna, the heart of the moon, the balance to the black alpha. His luminous eyes swept across the crowd. Alara Thorne. The name settled over her like a coronation. No longer Alara of Stone Creek. No longer Alara of the mountain. Alara Thorne, Lunar Queen. Kael looked down at the forgotten whimpering form of Garriott Hale. You are Alpha no more, he pronounced. You are stripped of your title, your territory, and your wolf. You will live out your days as a human beyond the borders of my kingdom. And every cold night for the rest of your miserable existence, you will remember what you threw away. He nodded to the royal guard. Remove him. Garrett was dragged from the plateau, his screams fading into the wind. No one looked back. The return to Ethelgard was unlike any journey Alara had experienced. There was no prisoner and no king. There was only a bonded pair, their presence so overwhelming that the royal guard kept a respectful distance. The bond between them sang with every step, a constant harmony that neither had ever known. They rode side by side, their hands occasionally brushing each touch, sending sparks of connection through their linked souls. Alara looked at the fortress of black stone rising before them. It had seemed like a prison when she first arrived. Cold, oppressive, a cage built from rock and power. Now it looked like home. As they entered the great hall, the court staff and warriors who had whispered about the feral Omega fell to their knees. Not because they were commanded to, not because they feared punishment, because they felt her. The scent of the moon made manifest had permeated the entire fortress during her stay. But now with the bond complete, it had transformed into something else entirely. A presence that soothed old tensions, that calmed aggressive instincts, that brought peace to a court that had known only the Black Alpha's restless fury. Where Kael's power demanded submission through strength, Alara's commanded respect through serenity. Two halves of a whole, darkness and light, fire and moonlight. That night in the royal chambers, Kael stood by the great window, watching the full moon rise over his kingdom. I have never known a moment of peace. His voice was quiet, vulnerable in a way Alara had never heard. My wolf has been at war with me since I was 15 years old. A constant rage, a burning need to conquer, to control, to hold everything in my grasp because nothing ever felt like enough. He turned to look at her. Until now. He crossed the room and stood before her, this massive, powerful, terrifying wolf who had conquered a continent. When the bond settled, he said, it was the first time I have ever felt quiet, the first time the fire did not burn. The first time I could simply exist without fighting myself. Alara reached up and touched his face. And I, she said, have never known a moment of safety. I was always hiding, always afraid, always making myself small so that larger wolves would not notice me. She thought of her cave, of the endless echoing loneliness of those months alone. In the mountains, I was strong. I was a survivor. But I was empty, hollow. A wolf without a pack is just a beast waiting to die. She took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars of a lifetime of battle. When the bond settled, she mirrored. I finally felt full. Kael pulled her gently into his arms. They stood there for a long moment, two wolves who had spent their lives incomplete, finally whole. Garrett was a fool, Kael murmured against her hair. He saw an Omega. He should have seen a wolf. He saw what I was, Alara replied. You saw what I am. No. Kale pulled back to look at her, his luminous eyes soft in a way she had never imagined they could be. I saw what you always were, even covered in dirt and blood, even pointing a knife at my throat, even defying the most powerful alpha on the continent. He smiled, and it was not the smile of a king. It was the smile of a man who had finally found his heart. I saw my queen. Alara rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was not demanding, not claiming. It was a promise, a beginning. Outside the window, the moon rose full and bright over the kingdom. Inside the chamber, two wolves held each other and listened to the harmony of their joined souls. In the weeks that followed, the kingdom transformed. News of the Lunar Queen spread across the continent faster than any messenger could carry it. Wolves traveled for days just to catch a glimpse of the woman who had emerged from the Forbidden Mountains. They came with skepticism and left with wonder, touched by the presence that radiated from Ethelgard like warmth from a hearth. The court that had known only Kael's iron rule learned something new. They learned that strength did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it healed. Sometimes it simply stood beside you and made you better than you were. Alara did not try to change them. She simply was who she was, and that was enough. She walked the halls of the fortress that had once felt like a prison and found that she knew every stone, every shadow, every secret passage. The servants who had once looked at her with barely concealed disdain now sought her counsel on matters large and small. The warriors who had questioned her worthiness now bowed not because they feared Keiko's wrath, but because they respected her. She had earned her place, not through birth or prophecy or the favor of a king, through survival, through strength, through the simple, stubborn refusal to be less than she was. On a morning 3 weeks after the Kratos, Alara stood on the highest balcony of Ethelgard, watching the sun rise over the kingdom. Kael found her there, as he always did. He did not speak at first. He simply stood beside her, his presence a warmth against the mountain cold. I received word from Stone Creek, he said finally. Alara did not turn. What word? The pack has chosen a new alpha, a female, one of the huntresses who was passed over when Garrett took the title. Is she good? She is fair, Kael said, and she has already sent tribute and pledged loyalty to the crown. She also sent a personal message for you. Alara finally turned to look at him. For me, Kael reached into his coat and withdrew a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. Alara opened it and read the words written in a careful, unfamiliar hand. Lunar Queen Alara. I remember you. I remember the girl who mended my hunting leathers when no one else would bother. I remember the Omega who always had a kind word, even for those who showed her no kindness in return. I am sorry for what was done to you. I am sorry that I did not speak up. I am sorry that I was a coward. The pack you left is not the pack you will find if you ever return. We are building something new, something better. And if there is ever anything Stone Creek can do to repay the debt we owe you, you have only to ask. With respect and hope, Alpha Marin Frost. Alara folded the letter and held it against her chest. She did not weep. She had shed enough tears for Stone Creek. But she smiled. You should visit them, Kael said. When you are ready, let them see what you have become. Maybe I will, Alara said. One day, she turned back to the sunrise. But not yet. For now, I want to stay here, with you, building something new. Kael wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. They watched the light spread across the kingdom, gold and pink and purple, painting the world in colors that seemed brighter than they had ever been. The rejected Omega who had fled into the mountains had found something greater than acceptance. She had found herself. She had found her equal. She had found home. Years later, when the barge sang of the Lunar Queen, they did not begin with her coronation. They did not begin with her marriage to the most powerful wolf in existence. They began with a night of fire and cruelty, a night when a foolish alpha looked at a gift from the moon goddess and saw nothing but weakness. They sang of a girl who ran into the mountains to die and found life instead. They sang of a king who searched for 15 years and found his heart in a cave behind a frozen waterfall. They sang of a bond that transformed a kingdom and a choice that changed the world. But most of all, they sang of Alara, the Omega who was told she was worthless, who believed it for a time, who survived anyway, who emerged from the crucible of the wilderness as something new, Something powerful, something no one had ever seen before. The heart of the moon, the balance to darkness, the rejected Omega who became a queen. Not because she was chosen, because she chose, and that the bards would say made all the difference.